Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. The practice of having a second job, typically in secret, in addition to one's regular employment, is called moonlighting. And as you know, Infosys, Wipro, TCS have all been in the news lately for highlighting concerns about moonlighting. And Wipro has even gone to the extent of firing 300 people because they had other jobs which were in conflict with the job they were doing at Wipro. So now to discuss about what is moonlighting and how does it tie in with the future of work, we have with us Suman and Sridhar. We'll be having a conversation about this. So I'm Bharath and welcome to All Things Policy.
Hi Bharath.
Thanks, Bharath, for having us.
So just a quick background about how this practice of moonlighting came about. So with all of us being, at home during the past 2 years, things have changed about how we work, where we work from, and work from anywhere is kind of an accepted, practice right now, especially in the tech industry. And as a unexpected consequence of this, you have people taking up multiple jobs, maybe two or even three. And this is kind of like an open secret in the tech industry that there are a few people who are working multiple jobs. And they're able to do it because they're working from home. You are not physically present. So that's where all of this comes about. Now, this has been highlighted as moonlighting, and there's a lot of talk about this. Now, first, we'll get to the framing of the issue itself, whether it's moonlighting, conflict of interest, cheating, two-timing, double life. These are all words that have been used while talking about this. So, Sridhar, Suman, you have both been in tech companies. You have worked, for quite a long period of time. So, what are your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Bharath. I honestly feel that moonlighting would not have been so easy to do in the past, right? Because people work from the office and tech companies have been sort of notorious in keeping their employees at their desks for much longer than is considered reasonable. And people have been struggling to finish the job that was given to them, even at one company, and they worked very long hours and came back and they just had enough time to sleep, etc. So that was really not an option. But come the pandemic, and people have now started working from home and are extremely reluctant to return to the office, as I'm told, in many places. And therefore, there is, first of all, the opportunity to work at multiple job arises. Secondly, the lack of supervision, as Suman sort of alluded to while you were giving the introduction. I think the fact that there isn't that supervision also means that people can sign up to work at multiple places and clock time in both places and get paid. So it's definitely possible. But is this right to do or not? I think, first of all, the contracts that most of us signed when we worked at tech companies was very clear. It was supposed to be a full-time employment, which meant that you are expected to work at this one place and not at multiple places. And I think, first of all, it's a violation of the contract that you signed with the organization. I think that's one. And if you leave the legal thing aside, I think there are challenges, because I think you have some ideas. Let's say you're a designer and you have some design ideas for your product, and now you are working at two companies. I mean, you have to choose which one to give your idea to. I think those kind of choices start getting made, and then the company, which is your principal employer, doesn't get everything that they could have got out of you. You're not probably working all the hours and putting in all the effort for the particular job, and you're trying to do a little bit here, a little bit there. There are deadlines everywhere. So which one do you sort of prioritize over the other? I think something has to give when you're working at something like this, unless organizations come back and say, hey, I'm going to pay you for a certain output and not just for the time. As long as people are being paid for the time, there'll always be an opportunity to moonlight, especially when you're not working under.
Just coming in there, for me, the heart of the issue is the changing nature of employment. And eventually, ultimately, it is like all other relationships, a relationship of trust, right? So the employer trusts you with certain things and you trust the employer with certain things. Now, with this changing nature of work, what we are seeing is tug of war, or some kind of friction in this relationship that is there. Now, how this will pan out, I mean, at this point, it appears that there is some kind of friction, there's some kind of acrimony between the two sides, but I think eventually you'll settle down to an equilibrium if you figure out what is the nature of the relationship between an employer and employee. And this nature of relationship between the employer and employee is changing. I mean, it is a generational shift that we are seeing in terms of the workforce itself. So the old rules of everyone being wedded or being committed to a job is going to change. How we deal with this is what lies at the heart of the matter. Okay. Now, I think, I mean, it is very specific to each sector. Now, there are instances of moonlighting. I think we saw Swiggy coming up with some moonlighting policy saying we will allow this, whereas some other companies will not. Eventually, it is a business call that most organizations will take. And in the tech sector, it becomes a make or break situation in most cases, because there are issues of data security, there are issues of trade secrets, there are issues of IT security, and all of that. If you compromise on all of this, and moonlighting gives you a perfect leeway, I mean, the organization stands compromised on all these parameters if they allow for moonlighting. Now, unless you figure out a way around this, I don't think organizations will allow for moonlighting. Having said that, I think what needs to change is employers need to recognize the changing nature of the workforce and therefore provide some flexibility in working hours or kind of work, or I mean, what lends itself to moonlighting, or what lends itself to alternate work or not. Yeah, I think that is something that we need to really think about. Because eventually, when I look at it, the trust, if there is a break of trust, it's going to work in an adverse way for both parties. Employers are going to start, surveillance a little more, like they're going to put some kind of, you're going to be tracked digitally or electronically on the number of hours you work. They're already starting it. You're going to get into that messy territory. Also, the nature of contract, they will be more strict on implementing the contract. All of those things come in. Eventually, that trust is going to get eroded. So, how we work around that is, I think, the crux of the issue.
Right. I think, yeah, like you highlighted, trust is very central to this debate, right? And especially in the knowledge industry or the tech industry, when, what you're working on could be used against your employer. So it might be that multiple companies are trying to bid for a project. And if you're employed at multiple of these companies, so where does your loyalty lie? And what if there's a conflict of interest? And what about, so basically it's like, does your employment relationship and confidential obligations, they're not limited to the 9 hours that you're working there. It might basically extend to your entire tenure over there, right? So that's
not just a tenure, right,
yeah.
Bharath? I mean, if you look at those confidentiality, sorry to step in, but I think it's important to realize that the contracts that we sign with with the companies that we work for are not. I mean, it's not to say that. I mean, if I work for an Accenture or you work for a Wipro or wherever it is, I mean, whatever trade secrets or whatever confidential information that we become privy to or on account of working there is something that we are supposed to take to our grave. We're not supposed to be sharing that information even after we leave the employment, right?
Right.
So it's not that if I know the hourly billing rates of individuals when I'm working there, I can just go and share them with somebody else. Or if I know the target margins for different types of industries, I can go and use that information when I'm working at another place. I think, or if I've got some proprietary knowledge about how something works or something is done, that I can go and share that. I think these are all things that you sign saying that it's confidential forever, right? So why is it that when somebody is working there, we are more worried that they will spill the beans than, like, people do leave organizations and go away as well. So I think, see, violating the law is one thing, right? I understand that the contracts are very clear. You say that you shouldn't work somewhere. But I think if we go into the idea of what is it that organizations are concerned about, if we go beyond the contracts and start looking at what are the interests of the different parties, there are employees who want, why do employees want to moonlight? Why are some employers against moonlighting? Why are they taking that position? what are their true interests? That might help us to sort of get towards some kind of equilibrium that Suman's talking about.
Thanks, Sridhar. So before we get into some of the other issues around this topic, so we'll just take a quick commercial break and we'll be back in some time. So welcome back. We are having a conversation with Sridhar and Suman about moonlighting. So we just discussed about what the employers think and why they are concerned about this. Now, when we look at what employees think and why do they take up multiple jobs, what could be some of the reasons? Suman, would you like to take a go at it?
I think overriding everything is the need for more money.
Mhm.
At least in the IT sector, we haven't seen the starting salaries rise too much in the last decade or so. A few people have pointed that out. So it is, individuals look at self interest, and the incentives are such that, everybody's looking for extra money. And when the situation has presented itself for them to make extra money, the incentives are going to make them choose that, right? So I think that is the most important thing. Second, I think if IT companies have a bench, a practice of keeping people on bench or whatever. If people are for too long, utilization rates are not too high, or if they see a slump, then people want to do other things. And so they may want to, these are two things that I can think of in terms of why would employees want to do this.
Yeah, Suman, I think I've got a couple of other reasons which I think are also important. One is people want to learn new skills in the IT industry in order to remain relevant. And they need to constantly be acquiring new skills. So one day you need to learn C++, next day somebody comes and says, if you know Python, then you have a good chance. Then someone will come up with something else and, how do you use this tool or that tool, or and so on. And if they get an opportunity at another company where they can go and acquire and practice some new skills, then that becomes also important for them. This is also an important incentive for people to go out and moonlight. The other thing is the fact that in the past, if you look at companies where people worked, etc., you typically joined a company, you worked there, and you had a very long tenure, and you had some kind of job security, which meant that you can even hope to retire from one company, right? That's no longer the case. When companies sort of increase and decrease their manpower based on their demand, etc., employees start worrying about, they see their colleagues being made surplus or asked to go. And then they think, now's the time for me to earn some money. I have some skills. Let me go out and do this, so that since I don't have much job security, why not earn as much today as I'm capable of earning? I think that's another overriding factor which makes people not have that kind of loyalty towards their own firm, at moonlighting as a legitimate option.
That's really important, I think, to this discussion. So, the nature of employment itself is not like that long, stick to one and join one company and work there for the rest of your life or something like that. It's a very transient thing. And that kind of changes how people look at that employee relationship. So, it's also maybe some other symptoms in society itself, right? Which kind of maybe normalizes this to some extent. Maybe it's consumerism, a lack of job security, like you pointed out. All of these things kind of contribute or give people a reason to take up this, and also makes it acceptable amongst their circle of friends or whoever, that okay, this is something that you can do and there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, and during COVID, the absence of supervision, and also there was, people had some more time, even though they were doing household chores, maybe, but the absence of commute time is a big factor. So I think they had that much time, so they looked at it, as long as I am delivering outcomes, my whatever I'm supposed to do, how does it matter, or if I take up another job, right? But I think what we miss at that point is that as you grow higher in the hierarchy, you're expected to do more than just your tasks. They don't remain task based jobs as you grow in the hierarchy. Once it becomes a more managerial or a more broad based, not
Strategic,
task
yeah.
based as such, but more outcome based, I think the scope for this kind of thing will reduce. So I'm not really sure about what levels people were moonlighting, but I would imagine that it would be difficult at higher level.
Yeah, I think at higher levels, Suman, the kind of things people would do is probably support a startup and spend a lot of time on the startup idea. And let's say they have a young friend who's sort of doing something and they work alongside this person, give them lots of inputs, study that, maybe even share some of their relationships with them, and so on, right? I think there are those kind of things that most senior people are able to do. They might even invest in those startups and help support them and run them while they are working. They may not go and join another company and do it, but they may do it for themselves in some direct or indirect fashion. Yeah.
Okay, that would become a concern maybe at some point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what are employers' concerns while we're doing this, right? I mean, I think we talked about employees' concerns, why they do this. What are employers' concerns? I mean, why are employers so
Yeah.
upset?
I mean, like I discussed, I think it's a business imperative, right? You will lose business. I mean, because you have people who could be moonlighting, you are exposing your business to a lot of risk, like the data risk or IT security risks or trade secrets or any of this. And that can spell doom for your business if something goes wrong there. That is the primary driving concern. If you ask me, it's a business risk which has to be taken care of. I don't see how you get around that. I mean, I think it's a very valid concern.
Yeah, it might be built into the contract that they have with the client, right? That
Yeah.
these things have to stay within the, you know.
If you renege on your client contracts, then your business is doomed. It's a
Yeah.
survival
But
thing.
that would be a criminal offense, isn't it? I
Yeah.
mean, I think like we can't, I mean, it's one thing to do a civil offense or something, but then to go and actually like leak secrets or take client data, etc. I'm not sure, like, anybody would, even the biggest proponents of moonlighting, would not support sharing confidential information
You,
or passing on trade secrets
you may
to
not
other
do it.
companies as part of that, no?
You may do it just inadvertently, and that is also a risk.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we accept that that is a problem and that cannot be condoned, but let's say that companies come and say, listen, if you want to do moonlighting, go ahead. If you want to work at multiple jobs, do it. Here is an outcome that I expect you to deliver on, and you deliver this outcome in this particular amount of time. And what you do after, say, 8 p.m. at night or whatever is your business, or 7 p.m., 6 p.m., whatever is the time. And then say that, like, after that, like, it's your business, right?
Yeah,
And
but
you
again,
don't work on company laptop, use your own laptop and work on it,
yeah, there
and
is. I mean,
use company devices to do this work.
when you're working remotely, it becomes harder for employers to control all of that. Whether you're working on company laptop or other laptop, whether you're working, all of that comes into play, right? I mean, at the heart of it, I don't. I mean, even when this issue was not there, I'm sure people went up to managers and said, dear managers, and spoke about things that they wanted to do outside of work, right? And nobody stopped them. So it is a question of, having an open conversation and figuring out what works for both sides and what works for the organization, what works for the employee. As long as that transparency is there, I think, and there are certain things that are complete no or that are out of bounds. So yeah, I think as long as those things are respected, I think employers should be flexible or should be open to the idea of employees doing other things.
I think just like what you were talking about, it kind of shows that we are at a transition point where, instead of having a permanent employees, maybe employers might think of a core team who would be permanently employed. And you might have another team who would be more like gig workers who come and execute a certain well defined task which has clearly defined outcomes, and they can be gig workers, they can take up multiple jobs. All of this is something which has come out as a result of the 2 years that we have been working from home. And maybe we're at that transition phase where we're seeing the nature of work itself change, and things might be very different as we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely, Bharat. I think, if you look at the studio system that used to exist in the film industry years ago, between 1920 and 1960, most of the films were made by, like, 5 studios in Hollywood. And those 5 studios sort of hired all the actors, the directors, everybody, right? Everybody who was involved in producing a movie were employees of the studio. They were not allowed to go and work for other studios at the same time while they were on contract here. And that's how it was. And in fact, they went to the extent of even owning movie theaters and everything. And even the distribution and the screening of films was controlled by this one group. And then the Supreme Court sort of ruled in 1961, if I'm not mistaken, and said that this cannot go on. And like they had to pretty much stop doing this. And it sort of became much more like a gig. Well, actors and everybody else sort of started working at bidding for work from different studios, and different producers got together, made a movie, and it went on. And like, there are so many more movies made, so many more people employed, better quality of films are produced. Maybe it's a sign of things to change in a positive and in a good way.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Um, it just opens up different opportunities, and I think eventually it boils down to the nature of job, nature of industry, and the changing workforce. How we navigate through this, how we come to some kind of a conclusion is what will decide. And this is, I think, will continue. I mean, it's a rolling kind of thing. So yeah, and also we have to take into consideration the market as it is. I mean, now you could be in an employees market where the employees are commanding what they want and attrition rates are high and all of that. But if we see a recession coming, then the tables may turn and then somebody else will have the upper hand. So this will continue, and how we come to some kind of a stable thing is something that will be interesting to watch. At least I'm going to be watching this thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Suman. Thanks, Sridhar. This has been a really interesting conversation. It will be very interesting to see how this unfolds. And I hope you all enjoyed this conversation, and see you next time.
Thanks, Bharath. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.